Welcome to the first episode of the 2023-24 school year of Conversations with the Co-op, where we dive into topics that matter to the world of special education. I'm your host, Jeff Lee, one of the K-12 special education coordinators with the Paul Bunyan Cooperative. Today we have a special guest, my boss, Jen Johnson, Director of Special Education for 6 public school districts, 3 charter schools, and the Paul Bunyan Education Cooperative itself. We're exploring the multifaceted role of directors of special education in both cooperatives and single districts, and perhaps touch on the distinction between directors, assistant directors, and other positions within our co-op. Welcome, Jen.
Thank you, Jeff. It's a pleasure to be here.
Jen, let's begin by shedding some light on the role of Director of Special Education. It's a position that takes some different forms. Could you elaborate on what a director typically does and how that might vary between a cooperative versus a single district setting? And if you like, feel free to mention anything about how the assistant directors and coordinators fit into this puzzle.
That is a great question, Jeff, and there are so many pieces to the puzzle of a director of special education, as well as the roles in the cooperative. And every cooperative is different, and the role of a director in the cooperative is very different from the role when you are in a single district. I had the opportunity to work in a single district for the first 20 years of my career, and the last 6 years, I've been wearing the hat of the director in the Paul Bunyan Co-op. So I'll just kind of jump into some of the roles and responsibilities that I have as the co-op director. The 6 superintendents that are my bosses have it divided into 6 areas that they see as my responsibilities. So I have oversight of all the special education programming, birth to 22 throughout the cooperative. I develop the annual budget for the cooperative. I monitor the member district special education budget to ensure we're maximizing aid from state and federal sources. Compliance and monitoring, which is everybody's favorite topic. Not only due process, but systems and programming as well, student programming. Data management and reporting. There is a lot of reporting that we do to MDE, which then funnels up to the federal government as well. And then one of my favorites is public relations. Might be surprising to some staff members, but we do receive a lot of phone calls from parents. So we get a lot of those front-facing calls from the public, from our families. So we do a lot of public relations here at the cooperative as well. One of the things in a single district, when I worked in a single district, you are much more immersed in the day-to-day function of special education programming. You may be a little bit more hands-on in a single district because you have that one district. So the district that I worked in the metro, it was the same size as the co-op that we're in currently. Student count-wise, it was between 13 and 14,000 students in that single district that I worked in. But the square miles was maybe like 12 compared to, I don't know, it takes me, 60 minutes sometimes to get to Aiken. We travel up to Pine River as well. So the distance here really impacts the ability to be immersed in those day-to-day functions that occur.
I can see where it'd be difficult to get that face time equally amongst everyone when you're traveling between all those different districts.
Yeah. And one thing that people may not be aware of, our staff may not be aware of, is that I am in each of the member districts at least once a month. I'm trying to be more visible, but I do attend cabinet meetings or administrative meetings in each 6-member district. And we have yourself, Lainey, Joel, and Liz are also, you guys are more that forward-facing, front-facing that staff are seeing in the buildings on the day-to-day basis. And so those are the people that are really the visible staff members from the co-op, as well as all of our other coordinators, disability coordinators, and teachers that are in the co-op. But I am out there, meeting with the superintendents and the principals. The superintendents are the main people that I communicate in the role of the cooperative, which is different than when you're in a single district. In a single district, you may be more hands-on with those building principals. But in the co-op and our role here in Paul Bunyan, we have it set up where Liz and Joel, the assistant directors, are the ones meeting with the building principals on a very regular basis.
Right. And then you have us coordinators who are really out there a lot. And so there's kind of that dissemination of that information coming down. I know you guys spend a lot of time talking about the policies and then as the coordinators, Lainey and I are out there like kind of educating on what those decisions are.
Yep.
Which I can see being very different in a single district where it'd be a lot easier for you to be up there and talk directly to a group of staff. Or whatever.
Correct. Like in a single district, when we have professional learning days, a lot of times the director is there delivering that main message. When we have 6 districts, 3 charters, and we're up to 8 non-pubs this year, it's the most non-pubs we have, and it's very difficult to get out there and be that front-facing person delivering that message. That's why I depend on everyone else here to also be the face of the cooperative. You and Lainey deliver the messages, probably the most frequent out of the staff, messages that are more difficult, focus around systems, programming, due process. Right. So I really count on the 2 of you specifically to deliver that due process.
And I think it goes the other way too, where we hear a lot from the staff that we're bringing directly to you guys, where you guys then make the decisions and we bring that information back. We act a lot in that getting the information back and forth, but those big decisions are coming from the director and the assistant directors meeting together.
Yeah. And I think when we talk about decision-making processes, so I can talk a little bit about how that works in the co-op. So we have a board of delegates, and the board of delegates includes a school board member from each member district, and then a superintendent. So there's 12 people on the board of delegates, and then myself. I am a non-voting member, but those other 6 members are determining our policies throughout the co-op. So if you think of your school board policies, that is what the board of delegates is determining, our policies. So the board of delegates is, if you're looking like at a tiered system, they're at the very top. And then we have our executive board, which includes the 6 member districts and myself. I actually have one of those board meetings today. So I'm looking forward to that, to spending some quality time with the superintendents. And then within our PBEC internal infrastructure, we have our executive team, which includes myself and then the 2 assistant directors. And then we have our leadership team, which meets monthly. And on that leadership team is myself, the assistant directors, the K-12 coordinators, our disability-specific coordinators, and our early childhood coordinators. We also gather information from all stakeholders when we're making big programming decisions. So we gather information from special education teachers. If it is where parent engagement is needed, we collect data from parents, from the community as well. And we consider all of that data while we're making those decisions. And ultimately, I bring them back to the superintendent board, and then they make a motion to accept our proposals or not accept them. I will tell you there are many proposals that do not get accepted that staff never get to hear about.
Yeah. And I think there's another body that affects things, and especially when we're looking at that role of the director, is when we have these legislative changes, right? That these things come down. And how does that affect the director and their relationship with the district?
Yeah, that is a great question, especially after Minnesota's last legislative session. And I'm smiling here, and Jeff and I are laughing because it was about 700 pages in changes that occurred this last session that impacted special education programming and related services. And so once that legislative session ends, there's all of these changes, and it's up to us as directors and superintendents to interpret that information fast and furious.
Yeah.
And we have our professional organizations. MACE is the Minnesota Association of Special Education Administrators. And then there's MESA, the Minnesota Association of Superintendents. As my role of the director, I belong to MACE and MESA. So I wear both those hats. They considered this role as the executive director, that you're wearing the superintendent hat and the director of special ed. But this summer, it was a lot of time reading through pages and pages of changes and determining how it is going to impact us. And it was a lot of changes this year, especially around non-exclusionary discipline, the changes that are going to be coming along with restrictive procedures, seclusion, specific learning disability, the discrepancy model, sunsetting. This year there was a lot of discussion around SROs in the buildings and in districts. And so we really take that information and try to interpret it as best we can. The key thing here is the Minnesota Department of Education receives it as the same time as we are. So it is very hard to wait for guidance to come out. That's why the different organizations work hard with legal counsel to interpret it the best that we can and move forward.
Well, it makes sense why you are so busy. You are talking to a lot of different groups, trying to deal with a lot of different things and getting information kind of in that real time to staff in multiple districts at the same time. That's got to just be a lot for you to do.
It is a lot, but that's one of the reasons I love this job. It's always constantly changing. It's really fluid things. Things come fast and furious, and then we get to get it out fast and furious too. I have a question for you, Jeff. How many hours a week do you think on average that I sit in meetings?
Probably guessing 2/3 of your week is just sitting in meetings. That's not even like communicating to us, but...
Yeah, today I just quickly looked, our Google Calendars, if you look at it, they can do an analysis of meetings that you spend in per week. And in September, I was averaging 30.3 hours a week in meetings. Yeah. And so that means with one or more persons that I'm meeting with, I try to do a job where I block off at least 15 to 30 minutes after a meeting to do like follow-up, because there's always times when I walk out of a meeting that I have a to-do list, always. And then I realize I'm way behind on my to-do list and my follow-up. For example, something that people may not be aware of is that there is record retention policies that each district has. Probably you can find somewhere in your district where there's all these files of special education due process that are just sitting there because the Minnesota Historical Society says you just keep everything in perpetuity forever. Right. Eventually, you're going to run out of storage space. Right. So I'm currently working with districts to actually write a schedule where after a certain amount of years, after a student graduates or ages out of special education services, that we are going to actually destroy the records. We'll keep electronic files. But working on those policies, that's something that people may not be aware of, that the role of the director does. When you're looking at that, we look a lot at the workload policies in each of our member districts as well. But those are some of the things that happen that people may not be aware of.
Right. Jen, it's intriguing how different directors might take unique approaches to their roles. Can you share some insight on how directors tailor their strategies to best support districts or cooperatives, considering various needs and expectations, and really how it seems to change a little bit, and I would say superficially, when a new director comes in, it just gets a different feel, even though the policies and everything kind of remain the same, and the procedures typically stay the same, but there's just a different feel when a new director comes in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can see how people will feel different when a new director steps in, because how I approach things can certainly be different. I think a huge piece here is that I was completely new to the Paul Bunyan Co-op. I'm not a known entity in this region. I came from, outside of the region, and people don't know me in the other roles that I had in my previous district. For example, I started out as a paraprofessional. I was a classroom EBD center-based teacher, DCD center-based teacher. Then I stepped into a role of curriculum instruction as a coordinator, and then went into a supervisor, assistant director. So I spent 20 years in one system coming up, and I think here I'm an unknown entity. People don't know and don't have that trust and past relationships with me. And I think I am here. I am boots on the ground every day. And I think it's just different being not coming up in a system that people have typically previous directors have come up in the system and are known in the community. Right. And I was not known. And I think, like you said, we have very unique needs across the co-op. And as the director, each district has their own culture. And so my role in each different does ebb and flow and fluctuates of what I'm involved in, what they call me in to do. It's not a one size fits all. And that is very unique. And that was a really hard thing for me to learn. I like things to be black and white. Yeah. And special ed, there is a lot of gray, and we're always coloring outside the lines in our roles because the answer may change when people are asking. And that was a really hard thing for me to learn and adjust, because each district, like I said, is its own culture, and their needs are changing all the time.
It's important when you're talking about the needs changing that it's not just at these districts themselves, but the entire educational landscape has changed dramatically. And look at the past 20, 30 years, how we need to approach things is very different. So even at the district level, they're changing things, and then that affects how you have to operate too. That what happened 20 years ago and how we did things can't continue because things have changed.
Yeah, right. And that's why we have created positions like yours, Jeff, the K-12 coordinator, to support those tier 1 to tier 2 teachers who have not gone through college in a program and haven't had that student teaching that focuses on what it's like to be in a school, what it's like to be a teacher. What are those things that you need to know? So I'm relying on your position to be able to support those teachers. And we're always constantly looking and getting feedback of how we can change to do better to meet the needs of the students, because that is our goal, to ensure that every student has a free and appropriate public education. Right. And in order to do that, to ensure that, we have to support the teachers and give them what they need. Right. And sometimes we don't, as adults, we don't know what we need. So we are constantly trying to figure that out. Right. And if I could figure that out, I would be a millionaire sitting on a beach somewhere. Right.
It's difficult.
Yes.
Sure. Yeah, and the roles of the director, assistant director, and coordinators often involve responsibilities that aren't visible necessarily to case managers and teachers. And we've talked a little bit about how busy your schedule is and the different groups that you're a part of and trying to do. So you've done a nice job of kind of shedding some light on the behind the scenes work. Is there anything additional that would be important for people to understand about what you do? And really, most importantly, I really want to ask you about how all of this work that's kind of happening behind the scenes is ensuring a better outcome for our students. Even when we don't necessarily see it, how is that affecting our students?
Yeah, that is a great question, Jeff, and thank you for asking that. One of a large piece of what I have decided to focus on, I started last year to step outside of my comfort zone, and I joined through MACE, the legislative committee, because I really realized that in order to make the changes that we need within our school systems, it has to start at that state level. And this year I am jumping into the federal advocacy committee. And so really lobbying at the federal level to ensure that the funding is coming through that states and school districts deserve. Currently, IDEA is only federally funded, I would say, at 18%. The federal statute said it should be 40%. So we are missing 22% of our federal funding, and which would be a huge gift to the state of Minnesota because we have huge cross subsidies in all of our districts. Mm-hmm. I mean, anytime you are spending above what you're allocated, I mean, you're deficit spending. Right. We all know we can't have a negative in our checkbooks, in our bank accounts. And that's what's happening across the state. I mean, across the United States, I would say. And so I'm really stepping outside my comfort zone and learning what it means to advocate at the state level and the federal level. And it's very intimidating to have meetings with our legislators, with our senators, and talk to them. And I've been fortunate to have some actual face-to-face ones. And I'm still learning and building up my confidence when I'm talking to them because I don't have a lot of the language, sophisticated language that they are using, but I come and tell our story. What is our story in the Paul Bunyan Co-op? What's the story for Aiken, Brainerd, Crosby, Pequot, Pine River, and Pillager, and our charters? What is our story, and why is it important that our students have access to everything that they deserve?
I think that's super important now. I hear it a lot as I'm in the schools. Teachers, case managers are talking about the laws and the legislation that's come through and said, do any of these people know what we go through? And this is actually one of the ways that we're working as a cooperative, and you specifically had to advocate for that, to say, this is what we're going through, this is what we're seeing.
Yep, absolutely. It's so important to get our story out there, and they do listen. And I do feel that we have representatives out there who are representing us in a positive way. We just have to keep up that advocacy, keep sending the call to action emails when those come out, keep calling. Mr. Stauber, who is our regional representative, he has these town hall phone calls, and somehow I'm on the calling list. So when I hear my cell phone ringing and I see that number, I jump on and I ask those difficult questions about IDEA funding. And he's gotten to know who I am, Jen Johnson from Paul Bunyan. But those are important things to continue to do. It may not feel like it's making an impact, but it truly is. And so it's important that I continue to do that, and directors across the state continue to do that.
Thank you, Jen, for joining us today. I really appreciate all of this insight that you've given into the role of the directors of special education. As we learn, the roles can vary, but the commitment to the exceptional services remains constant. We're looking forward to future episodes. I know we've had lots of conversations here in the co-op about what some potential episodes would be to explore our ever-changing world of special education. So thank you, Jen, for joining us.
Well, thank you, Jeff, for having me.
That's it for this episode of Conversations with Co-op. We'll be back soon with more enlightening discussions. Stay tuned.